Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining for us today. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce our two co-presenters today. First, leading us through the presentation, Dave Cramer, who's Senior Digital Publishing Technology Specialist at Hachette Book Group. Even that broader title doesn't really capture all of the things that Dave gets to do at Hachette. He's a huge resource for the industry and particularly for us at BISG. We're also joined by Michael Johnson, who's Director of Content Partnerships at Benetech, which does a tremendous amount of work in this area, in particular with respect to accessibility. We're going to start with Dave, who's going to walk us through, and Michael's going to join on occasion, and we'll have time for questions. If you do have them, best place to put them is in the Q&A box or tab that's down at the bottom of the screen. You can also put it in chat. It's a little bit easier to track it in the Q&A if you can. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Dave Cramer, welcoming him and also thanking him for the presentation today.
Thank you so much, Brian. Today we're going to talk about page numbers in EPUB. I wasn't quite sure if this is the BISG coffee break webinar series or if it's the workflow education series. I think I've seen both on the calendar, so I figured I would cover all my bases here. So page numbers have been around for a long time. Supposedly, this is the first book with page numbers from the year 1470. I expect there are probably much earlier examples. It was a really good idea and it caught on. I wonder how many page numbers are in my house right now. There's got to be at least, there's probably 1 million of them if you add them all up. Page numbers are really useful. They make possible things like tables of contents and indexes, citations referring to particular places in books for scholarly uses or other uses. They even make certain memes possible. Open the nearest book, turn to page 64. The first sentence describes your life. I did that this morning, and the sentence was, "The farmers argued it was not possible to till their land without oxen." I have no idea what that means. So why do we need page numbers? Why do we need them in ebooks? We need them for all those same reasons. Our usual mental image here is someone in a classroom where some people have the print book and some people have an ebook, and the teacher asks people to turn to page 154. But even different, EPUB readers, if you don't tell them what the pagination is from a print source or something like that, they will sort of guess based on how many characters they think are in a page, or they'll count 1,024 bytes or something like that, and they'll give you an answer, and it will be different in every reading system. So even if everybody is reading an EPUB, you still can't achieve that consistency that you need for all this to work. The print book has page numbers, so the ebook should too. We have an obligation to provide our readers with all the affordances they have with the print book. We need to treat everybody on an equal footing. Even if content is purely digital, for the reasons I just mentioned, to ensure consistency across different EPUB reading systems and devices, it's good to provide a page list so that you can again have consistency between, people reading the same content in a different way. There are lots of other kinds of accessibility issues, just purely navigation in the book. Refer to the table on page 67. There's references and footnotes and indexes that might point to a specific page. As we mentioned, citations require page numbers if you're quoting something from a book for any number of reasons. You need to give the reader what they need to be able to use the book. We even have a more specific example here, say that we have a reader that has, low vision, so the print book is not an option for them. They have to use EPUB. A paragraph on page 82 references a table on page 83. Our reader is using the largest font size of 40 or something. If the ebook doesn't have this page list, this print page fidelity feature, that page 83 might actually be page 200. And, there's no way that you're ever going to be able to find that table in those circumstances. So basically, the book is unusable. The reader can't use the book. So this is really a critical feature for accessibility. So let's get into a little bit of the details of how we do that. So how do we include page numbers in an EPUB? There's sort of basically three pieces. First, there's this page list itself. This is sort of the navigation feature. That's the list of all the page numbers in the book. This is just like the primary navigation in an EPUB, which I hope many of you are familiar with, in that it's the HTML nav element. There's an ordered list inside it. And then in the list items, you have the links, in this case, to the individual pages. We also have a couple of attributes here that basically tell assistive technology what kind of thing is this. This is a page list. We do that in two different ways. We have the EPUB type attribute, which is probably going to be less useful in the future. And we're moving to the role attribute, which is used by ARIA to provide those sort of structural semantics. We also have an area label here so that assistive technology can describe to the user exactly what kind of navigation element they're looking at. So the next part is in the content itself. We have to mark up the page breaks themselves. So in this case, we had at the top, there's the last paragraph on page 155 of this particular print book. And then we have the page actually started with a new paragraph. And at that point, we insert this empty span element, basically. And it has, again, it has a role to describe its function to assistive technology. It's doc page break. It has an ID. That's what we link to so that that navigation will actually work. We click on that link, it takes us right to page 156. We have an area label so that assistive technology knows what to announce. We also, the title serves sort of the same role. My understanding is that Benetech advises that we use both. And then the third piece is in the OPF file of the EPUB, the package metadata. We want to describe, where do these page numbers come from? We use the Dublin core source, which is a related resource from which the described resource is derived. In this case, the pagination is derived from a related source, AKA the print edition of the book. We identify the book with the ISBN of the print book in question. This is an old book, so it has a 10-digit ISBN. If you're a really old person in publishing like me, you'll see the 06 prefix and recognize that the book was published by Harper. So it's all, the things to do in the EPUB itself, are not hugely complicated. The tricky part is, so how do we get this information? Say we have an InDesign file or something of our print edition and we want to turn it into an ebook. This is where things can get complicated. There's, there are some tools out there that will help with this. There's a circular flow plugin you can use with InDesign that will do this. I think InDesign only does it automatically for fixed layout books where it's pretty easy to create a page list anyway. There's a script called page staker that works with InDesign. If people want to learn about this, I can point them to people who know how to get it. I know that some of the tools we use in our typesetting system, they have this functionality built in. So I think it exists in some other tools. In a lot of cases, even with the tools, there might be a little more scripting needed to sort of clean up any artifacts that are left by the tool, or to sort of, basically improve the markup a little bit. Like if you have the EPUB type, but you don't have the role attribute, then it would be relatively easy to write a script to sort of duplicate the EPUB type with the ARIA role. I do want to mention some possible complications. It's like, a print book may exist in a lot of different editions. I've actually faced this in my own life doing a book club about this book, and where different people have different editions. And so that's one reason to have that DC source. So at least you have something in the EPUB that indicates which print edition that particular pagination came from. I do like this slide, possibly because I really like this book. There are sometimes questions about, here's the really unfortunate case where the page break happened in the middle of the word. If you're a typesetter, please don't do that. In our case, we don't want to put the span in the middle of the word because, among other things, that could cause problems for things like text-to-speech. And so in this case, we would actually move the span to immediately after the word. There's a bunch of sort of edge cases around things like that. I know there's also been a lot of discussion of things like what to do with blank pages in print, if they should be included in page list. We have lots of different numbering schemes that happen in print books. Front matter might be, labeled with, lowercase Roman numerals before Arabic numerals in the body matter, especially higher education. In the backs of higher education books, you may have more complicated numbering systems. So there's sort of a lot to think about. And we can talk about that. That's really all I had, is sort of the brief introduction to why we're doing this and how it works under the hood. And so I hope there's lots of people with questions and things to contribute or discuss.
Thank you, David. We do have several questions, but before we get started, I just wanted to ask Michael if he had anything, particularly from the Benetech or the accessibility point of view, that you wanted to add to what David had said. I think you want to unmute yourself. There you go.
There you go. Can you hear? There we go. Okay.
You're good.
I just want to add some color. Everything that Dave laid out, of course, was spot on, and the technical issues and the practical reasons why you do this. I just ask the audience to consider, as it relates to ebooks and accessibility, navigation for someone who has a print disability is almost entirely based on page numbering and page breaks and things like that. So we're talking about over 20% of the world's population who has some sort of print disability. And as Dave said in his part of the presentation, if they can't navigate the book, then the book is useless to them. So I ask you to consider that when you're doing your layout, your coding, your ebook creation, to consider accessibility, particularly around page navigation for today's talk, as a critical element to allowing these people to successfully use your book. In an educational setting, it's critical. But in a general reading session, it's also important, because if you can't navigate the book, you can't use it. So just a little color there.
Thank
Thanks.
you. No, that's really helpful. The one question that came in actually, Dave, while you were initially talking about it and describing how to place a page break in an EPUB file, Angela is just observing that that allows, for example, navigation from a page number to the page. But if you wanted to know what page in the print book you want it, if you're somebody who's going to cite it and was kind of working in a digital document, how can you know what page number it's on? And I think the list view actually gives you the ability to print that or not print, but to display that number in the document, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's differing opinions on whether to have the page markers themselves visible or not. You could also, instead of using an empty span like I did in my examples, you could also just have an element where, instead of having the ARIA label title, you actually had the direct content of, you could have span 157 or page 157 as something that would appear in the text itself. And, this makes it easier for, readers of the print book to have that information available to them. But it also can possibly be a little bit disruptive of the reading experience. Also, in general, if you do include a page list, then the reading system will be displaying these page numbers as part of the user interface of the book. It's like, even in the old days in Adobe Digital Editions, that print page number, if you built the page list, would show up in the right-hand margin. And so you would have that information available to you, no matter how you were consuming that particular ebook.
This is a little bit outside the core work that you do, but because it's specific to reference, but Paul's asking, he's publishing reference books that sometimes have tables that span more than one page. And sometimes the table itself is split across pages at the column level. That's, the orientation probably being a portrait. Is there a best practice for placing pages in these two cases? I mean, do you put a break in the middle of a table where the empty span may work as the last cell, or is it indicating that the horizontal page break that aligns with a column? I mean, how do you tackle that?
I mean, in general, I would follow print as closely as I can. I can put the span almost anywhere inside an HTML table structure. So I could just tuck it in at the beginning of the first cell after that page break. And so if there was a reference to, page 374, then it would at least get me pretty close to where that was, even if it was in a 50-page table. I know there's a lot of subtleties to doing this for tables that I don't have experience with, so that there are likely other people on the call who could probably give a better answer.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel's asking in a comparable way, mentioning higher ed in this case, that textbooks with multi-page spreads, and is there a recommended technique for page numbering an image that has multiple pages? I think that might be in part a function of product design.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky if you're talking about something that's an image that really does go across an entire spread of a book, because you can't put a little span halfway in an image.
Agreed.
That's just, my first instinct would just be to put both page markers at the beginning of the image. And so if someone was sent to page 37, they'll get, if they're sent to page 38, they'll get there. If they sent to page 39, they'll get there too. And again, these aren't, these aren't ways of targeting content at the most granular level. You know, a page can, in some books, still can be, it can be, it's a lot of lines of text. It's hundreds and hundreds of words. And so, this will get you in the vicinity, but might not exactly get you to the, third word of the second paragraph of page 25.
Yeah, and Richard's asking a variation. I guess this is a popular question for today, a variation on that about a page break that occurs in the middle of a table. And he indicates his practice is to place the break before the table. But just wondering if that resonates with you. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think like a lot of things, there's not a clear cut right answer, and everybody who does it any differently is entirely wrong. I would sort of think about how people use your content. It's like, is the text referring to different parts of the table? You may need something more granular in that case. Yeah, again, that's something I don't have a ton of experience with from my point of view.
And is it fair to say that there's not best practice maybe hasn't been defined, but it's kind of the conversation that occurs whenever these situations pop up, and kind of that's how best practice kind of gets played out, because you see how eventually how the product is used and how the information is consumed, and that may either confirm you did the right thing or change your mind about how to handle it.
I would also mention that even, no matter how you make those decisions, the fact that you're doing this at all is going to be of tremendous benefit to the end user of that content. And so I would urge people not to make the perfect the enemy of the good, and to do this even if it feels like you're being sloppy and you don't have all the answers and there's edge cases you don't understand. It's like, do something and it's going to be a lot better than it already is.
So Ashley's asking a question that's I think is more in your comfort zone, that, are there scripts to make this coding work, or is there a lot of manual work that goes into every EPUB?
Well, I mean, I sort of think this kind of stuff is what computers are for. And so if you don't have a script, you should try to find one or have someone make one. I think, I mentioned that page staker script, and I think if you do some searching, I know Laura Brady has done some articles in EPUB Secrets about this that mentions some of the scripts and some of the cleanup techniques. Yeah, there's
so essentially, the more work that you're doing manually, the more arguments you have for creating a solution that gets you out of that business.
Yeah.
Kristen's asking, is there a way to make Kindle understand page numbers?
I don't know the answer to that question, actually.
All right, we're going to save that one, Kristen, and see if we can find you a definitive answer. But
they seem very fond of their locations.
Judith is asking, do you think publishers will potentially move away from page numbering as navigation towards head numbering? She's mentioned the Modern Language Association does something like that for its handbook.
I know people have been talking about sort of alternatives to page numbers for, as long as I've been in this business, which is quite a while. I would also mention that there's lots of uses for page numbering in books that don't have detailed heading structures, and where that kind of technique would probably not work very well in a novel, which again, you may be using in an educational context or lots of other contexts. Page numbering is really universal in, the print world. And I think it's going to be a touchstone for how people interact with books for a long time. I mean, it's like, it would be kind of cool to see like Penguin Random House start doing paragraph numbering in their novels, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Richard's asking about generating pseudo page numbers when there's not a print source. So you're not matching it to an existing document. He's claiming that, he sees it as having advantages for page navigation.
Yes, absolutely. That, sort of doing something that's consistent between different reading systems can be really valuable. There's actually work ongoing in the W3C about that. There's a locators task force in the EPUB 3 working group. And one of the things they're talking about is to try to create a sort of universal algorithm that in that case would sort of give the same results no matter what sort of reading system you were on. And so it would be able to provide that sort of synthesized page list, but one that would match all the way across the industry, and instead of each of us trying to figure out something on our own. So that work is ongoing.
Emma's asking, what's the incentive and for publishers to add page numbers to backlist EPUBs? So that if publishers have been doing it in their current workflows, they may still have a lot of backlist titles that don't have page numbers. Is that something worth going backwards to? That may be something, Michael, you also want to weigh in on.
Yeah, so as we go through these conversions, whether it was, hardback to paperback 75 years ago, or print to digital 25 years ago, or digital to accessible, whatever these conversions are, the backlist is always a consideration. And you need to go through the same consideration you would for anything else, right? Is it an evergreen title? Okay, well, if it's an evergreen title, then yes, you should probably look at putting the page numbers in for all the reasons we described. If you're going to do business in Europe, because the European Union has passed the European Accessibility Act, which requires fully accessible ebooks, well, all content and systems. So if you want to sell your ebooks in Europe, you're going to have to do it, because that's going to be the law in the EU. It's going to be rough. I'm not a lawyer, but it's going to be roughly the GDPR equivalent. From security will be the accessibility equivalent for ebooks in Europe starting in 2025. So there's lots of different drivers, but I wouldn't wholesale go back and convert them all, just like I wouldn't wholesale go back and take every print book and turn it into an ebook 25 years ago, or every hardback and turn it into a paperback whenever you do that. So you just need to consider, if you're going to touch the book in any meaningful way, you should certainly do it. And if you're trying to comply with local laws, you're going to have to do it. From an accessibility standpoint, it's essential. You basically reduce the book to a digital paperweight if there's not proper page navigation for somebody with a print disability.
So the core argument there, particularly for markets like in Europe where it's required, is that you won't be able to sell your backlist. Seems like an
I'm not in a position to offer. Yeah, I'm not in a position to offer legal opinions, but that does seem to be the shakeout that come 2025. The European Union has said all digital goods and services, which includes books and platforms, for those of you who are publishing in platforms, reading systems, all those things need to be fully accessible. So if Europe's important to you, then I guess, yes, you're going to have to do it.
I expect there also might be regulations around educational content in other parts of the world as well. If you want your book adopted, in a school somewhere.
Right.
Then it needs.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Dave. In the United States, as an example, the accessibility, the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, is pretty clear that any student needs to have full and equal access to any digital content, just like their fellow students would have to print content. So there again, without page numbering, it's not a similar experience. So you'd be in violation of ADA. But it's typically the institutions that get sued, but the publishers only half a step away from that.
I'm going to ask before I go into the last couple of questions, Robert Smith, you'd asked how official is this recommendation, but your question came in at a time I didn't see it. So if you could just add a little bit of language in the Q&A box about what recommendation you're thinking of, and we'll see if we can give you an answer. So Rachel's is just, and this seems to be a synchronization or an arc around synchronization between print and digital content. So just saying that customers sometimes report that page numbering is not consistent with a digital project because they moved an image from its original location in the print document to something that was more logical in the digital design. So a photo that appeared on page 50 might then fall between paragraphs on a succeeding page. So when a user looks for the image, they look at page 50 and don't see it. How do we kind of, do we need to synchronize print and digital? And if we do, is there a way to kind of get at that?
Yeah, I don't have like specific knowledge of this context, but again, you know, getting close is better than not trying.
The question, go ahead, Michael.
So there's the issue about usability. So the end user would much prefer that if the picture was in a different place or on a different page, that the digital material told me that.
Right.
So the reason that I always talk about print page fidelity, and I think Dave's made the same point, is we want the end user to have a positive experience. So just like when you move to large print, as an example, or you move from hardback to paperback, the pagination might move around a little bit. And that's just a function of the format. And the same thing may happen in digital. What we don't want is the content of the digital book to say, go to page 48 for this critical piece of information. And then I go to page 48 and it's not there. So if in the digital version, for whatever your markup reasons or layout reasons, you put it on page 49, then you should change the text that says go to page 49 instead of page 48. So it's not a question of rigorous dogma that it must match. What we're looking for is the same level of reading experience from an accessibility standpoint.
And it's kind of a comparable question that this is just seeking advice on redistributing content due to moving an image or sidebar that's near a text column from a later page. You get a warning and validation if the number is off, if the numbering is off. That feels like it's kind of the same answer in part, that you just have to design the digital product to reflect where you are, what it is, and then make sure the internal references work, right?
I was ages ago, I was involved in a custom publishing project where professors would assemble chapters from, different textbooks. And, there were a lot of cross references of the form, see figure such and such in the next chapter or in the previous chapter. And so we actually did a lot of work to, in some cases, rewrite those so that they would function across more circumstances. I wonder if we're going to evolve in a direction where we become less tied to the language of page numbers, and do more sort of robust descriptive ways of pointing people towards referenced content.
Agreed. I mean, I've done a fair share of workflow projects, not in this role, but in my prior one. And one of the things that was particularly memorable was the C page TK as the shorthand, and just showing up in print.
I've been there.
Yeah, we've all been there. So it's not solved just yet. So Robert Smith was just asking about, Dave, you had kind of the three pieces of the puzzle that you needed to, the list view, the inserting, and then the declaration. And I think he's asking how official is that? And I think it's not the Dave Cramer version. That really does reflect best practice right now for identifying and placing page numbers in digital books.
Yeah, all the page list is defined in the EPUB 3 specification itself. And I believe its use is essentially mandated in the EPUB accessibility specifications, also created by the W3C.
And ARIA, which we'll increasingly rely on going forward, is
Yeah.
also widely maintained, and not just for EPUB, but obviously for documents and document accessibility.
I think the key point is that the EPUB accessibility specs are built on WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, since, we're mostly talking about HTML here. And so, using page numbers, I think, is a necessary technique to achieve certain WCAG, to achieve WCAG conformance for, I'm spacing on the vocabulary used in WCAG because.
No, but until we have another way to navigate, that's the solution.
Yeah.
And finally, Hannah was just asking earlier in the presentation if slides would be available. Dave, you put these together with help from Michael, Rachel, and I think Laura Brady. We'll check with everybody to make sure that they're okay with it, but I think they will be, and if so, then we'll distribute it to everybody who's registered.
Cool.
I think that captures all of the questions we have today. Dave, I really appreciate your pulling together all these thoughts and sharing them. And Michael, thank you for joining us and contributing the perspective from both from Benetech and from the accessibility point of view. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll see you again soon.